Okay, perfect.
Okay, here we are with Sarah Sutherland. Struggling with an internet connection. It's like Amy coming through to the president from Nevada. So
I had that
hopefully,
exact same thought when we were trying before.
yeah, isn't it? So bear with us. Hopefully, you won't freeze in any awkward facial expressions or anything, Sarah. And do you want to start by telling us how your role expanded this year on the show?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that one of the privileges of working on the show for so long is that when Catherine started, she was in college. And so she was sort of a more peripheral presence who just came back during holidays to kind of wreak havoc. Whereas now, she's out of school. And because she's making a documentary, she has sort of more of a reason to be a physical presence in the White House.
And let's talk about that documentary episode from last night. And it's been submitted on quite a few of the Emmy ballots that the show's put forward. And your character's front and center in that episode, but we probably see less of you than in other episodes because you're behind the camera more. We hear more of you than ever before. What was that episode like in putting together for you?
Yeah, it's so nice to be able to talk about it as well, because it was obviously sort of a coveted secret that it was actually going to be finished. But yeah, the process of doing that was so amazing for me because basically, I mean, with all of our episodes, there's a lot that ends up on the cutting room floor that isn't seen. Like, I don't think people probably realize how much work goes into making Veep. But this episode specifically, when it was cut together and pared down, was an hour and 10 minutes. And so there was a lot of material generated. And for me, I got to just be on the other side of the camera doing interviews. So I basically got like private improv shows from each of the respective actors in this show. So that was a really great experience because it was just, they were hilarious. And it was also like a master class in improvisation. And yeah, the voiceover was really interesting to record because sense that Catherine has documentarian role, and yet actually very good. And it's an interesting thing where she feels very passionately about everything that she's talking about, and yet how passion filters through Catherine is very muted and very dim. And so it was like an interesting balance of recording that voiceover and hearing the sound in isolation and kind of contending with the fact that it sounded like Daria or something, like this very unenthusiastic thing, because that is Catherine and that's her character. But then we sort of played with maybe how she would play up the way that she usually talks, or how excited she normally gets, because this is something different and you haven't seen her sort of in her respective element before.
And this really was such an interesting episode of the series because it did it sort of brought all the previous episodes of the series together. It touched base with them, showed us ends to scenes that we'd seen the first part of, but from sort of Catherine's perspective, and sort of also concluded the sort of election storyline to a degree, or at least the congressional vote. And there's now a website set up for that documentary film, which is pretty cool. Tell me how important you think that episode is for the whole series and telling the story of the series.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely get a lot of perspective and are privy to things that you haven't seen before about the characters. Even the flashbacks of episodes, or Selena and Gary when they were younger, and seeing bits and flashes of Catherine's experimental dance in college. There are all these little seeds that have been sown consistently through other seasons that Dave Mandel wanted to reincorporate, and it was sort of a give Catherine a reason to be in bigger group scenes in rooms that she wouldn't otherwise have security access to, but then also to kind of sides of each of these characters. Like, for example, for me, doing the interview with Amy was so funny because it was just so odd to imagine Amy coming home from work and being in her apartment and what she might or might not do, because her identity is so tied up, and all of these characters' identities are so tied up in the White House. And so usual kind of thing to be able to see that side of everybody's life outside of it and outside of how they relate to Selena, because she's essentially the center of the universe to each of these people.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you talked about doing those interviews with sort of like a master class in improv. Sorry, did I freeze?
Oh, just for a minute. You're
okay.
there.
Yeah, you're saying how those interviews you did in the episode were sort of master classes in improv. I imagine like Veep in general has been a bit of a master class in improv in the way the scripts are constructed and refined through the cast improvising everything. Especially with, Matt Walsh and people on the cast. It's such extensive history of improv and with the UCB and all that sort of stuff. How has that been like the improv side of this show?
Will you ask me the last part of that question? I only got half of it.
Yeah. What has that improv experience been like for you on Veep?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's been extraordinary. In the first season of the show, before I shot my episode, essentially what was a theater at HBO, all of the episodes like a play, and we did a lot of improv. And so to be able to have been there in the beginning and be collaborating and creating this character was such an unusual experience to have, especially as a young actor. And also someone who comes from a theater background, like, because the way that we rehearse things is really unconventional. And I think we probably rehearse things more extensively than a television show might. But interestingly, I had never done any kind of UCB training or any kind of formal knowledge. I had never played a comedic part. Of course, it goes without saying, Catherine in isolation is actually not very funny. I think she's sort of someone, like, a lot of her humor comes out of situations and behavior. But for me, it was initially really daunting to step into this cast of people who are comedy titans, but they were so warm and so welcoming. And just by the nature of the process that Armando set forth in the beginning and that Dave continued, it made my job really easy, because I was privy to watching how they approached all these things and learned so much by way of that. And also, honestly, if you're in a scene opposite Julia or opposite Tony Hale or opposite Matt Walsh or all of these people, like you were saying, they make you look better. And I think true improvisers who are really good at that are very generous actors, because part of it is not saying no and not making the other person fail. Like, you are very supportive. And I think having these huge ensemble scenes also has to do with all of us bonding so immediately as a cast,
With all the people I've spoken to from Veep, the word that seems to come up the most is collaborative or collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really true. It's not us being diplomatic. The process is insanely collaborative. And even when we go to shoot a scene, there's always a reworking of the pages on the spot. Like, the writers are such heroes in this show, and they go so above and beyond sort of the normal protocol. And also are so respectful of the actors, and really give all of us an opportunity to voice what we think our character would or wouldn't do. And so in that sense, it's usual sort of group of people and family that we have.
Has there ever been a moment of improv or something that you've found in the room that you're particularly fond of?
Yeah, I mean, there are like too many to count. The thing about this show is it definitely teaches you not to be precious, because there's so much that happens behind the scenes that you won't actually see in a given episode. Also, because we speak so quickly and it's such rapid fire pace that it just, a lot of things get edited to keep that pace up. I mean, I think there was a scene after I punch the person who I think is trying to attack my mom, with Anna and Julia and I, that was entirely improvised and someone just riding around in a car. The birthday cake after my 21st birthday and them kissing outside of the car was completely improvised. This year, the scene between me and Clea Duvall when we're sitting in the hallway after that we're in love, that was improvised. And that was really fun because at that point, since Catherine and Marjorie happens off screen, it's the first time that Clea and I got to work directly together. Interesting thing to just be thrown into something that on script and sort of try to figure out how these two people who are very understated and muted and not terribly emotive, like how they flirt or how they talk to each other. That was a lot of fun. Being in the closet for the documentary episode when Catherine witnesses Tom James and her mother, that was a great improv moment. Also, this is an older one, but the at-home special with Alice and Janney, that was almost entirely improvised, and we shot that episode in 48 hours. So that was a extraordinary and unusual experience.
Did
so many. So being privy to watching, you definitely see a lot of like great moments between Julia and Tony before a scene starts where they're just doing bits and improvising in character and not to laugh because you haven't even.
Yeah. Did with that sort of like you mentioned the scene where you're in the closet with when Selena and Tom Jane, like were they sort of moments from that episode that you guys were shooting while you were shooting the other episode, or did you have to go back and like catch all those sort of tail ends of scenes and different perspectives of those scenes?
No, I mean, so obviously in part because the light needs to be on so that it looks like it's recording, but the idea was that they would use a lot of footage from respective episodes that I had shot from my vantage point. Unfortunately, what we didn't account for is that we have an insane amount of characters in our show, and it was virtually impossible when the cameramen, given the way we shoot, since it's documentary style, are moving around trying to catch everyone's reactions. Someone always came into my shot, or you could see some sort of lighting fixture that was contrived. So I don't think they were able to really use all that as much. So to go back and do all of that was production week, but luckily because the interviews were improvised, you know, shooting those went by pretty quickly, but we did go back and sort of reshoot little moments that you had seen in prior episodes for the most part.
Yeah. Is it been what is it ever you were talking about like how much stuff like we don't get to see that's improvised and part of the process and stuff like that? Is there been like what's the funniest thing that's ever happened while shooting Veep?
Oh, the funniest. I mean, this is really the only one that's coming to mind, which there's no way that this is the only answer to this question, and I will absolutely finish this. There was a scene where we were shooting when Catherine is still a vegetarian in the earlier seasons, and I don't even remember what the exchange was between Andrew, my father, and Selena. But I started actually choking on the chicken, but they didn't stop shooting. It was, we were all laughing so hard and crying, and I just had, you know, all of this food running out of my mouth. But that's definitely probably not the best example. It's just the first thing that came to my head.
Yeah, that was good. What there was there was the documentary. There was Catherine being in a new relationship this year on the show. There was the stuff with Catherine's grandmother and her passing away. What excited you most as an actress of all those sort of things?
honestly, and this is entirely true, all of those things excited me for different reasons. Obviously, I loved the idea that Catherine would see this filmmaking thing through. But then what was interesting, a lot of fans that came up to me before last night's episode aired expressed this inherent tension they felt, that they knew that Catherine was going to use this documentary to finally, like, you know, fight back with her mom or show her mother in a terrible light, and she doesn't. And so I was excited that people sort of thought it might be one thing and then it was another. Because interestingly, it becomes really self-focused, and you sort of see that there are ways in which Catherine, like her mother, and I think psychologically this year that were interesting to play with, the fact that the person that she falls in love with is the body double of her mother, and what that says and connotes about Catherine maybe trying to play out and have some kind of corrective emotional experience to heal from her and her mother's relationship. Obviously, it's not something that when I'm playing her, I'm supposed to be cognizant of, but I really liked that sort of weird gray area thing that the audience would see. I think one of my favorite things that I was excited about playing, because I think that there's so much that you see in that episode that explains why Selena treats Catherine the way that she does. And also, it's very tonally different from anything that we've done on the show before. And it was a really interesting thing to explore and find that balance of exploring loss while still having it be funny. Because obviously, as an actor, you want to play it honestly and give the circumstances their due emotions. But without it getting too dark, that's really fun to strike in Veep, and particularly with Catherine. It was a lot of fun to play with.
It is interesting, the relationship with the body double, and sort of how, you know, like Catherine's getting so much attention from someone that looks so much like her mum when her mum has given her so little on the show.
Yeah, definitely. And also, just as the person who's been the keeper of this character and like lives in her skin for a certain amount of time, it's really nice to explore moments where she feels joy. Like, even it's a small moment in the overall documentary, but shooting the part where Marjorie is waking up in bed, I realized when we were shooting it and I was giggling and laughing that it's the first time that Catherine has ever laughed on the show. And so it was really nice to kind of be able to broaden that aperture a little bit. And I think it was totally appropriate that she hadn't before, in the sense that, you know, she is a very gloomy character who feels defeated. And as you see, as evidence from the show, has had years of and not heard and not taken seriously. So it's completely understandable, I think, why she is the way she is and how sensitive she is emotionally, and the ways that her development is almost arrested. But you get the sense, I think, in this season, or hopefully, that she's starting to seek out other than her mom. And I think, unfortunately, she probably will never get that from her mom. So hopefully, you know, it sort of continues that she opens up and in her life.
Were you the one filming that scene in the bed? Like,
oh yeah, so what we did, I wasn't holding the small handheld camera, but I was standing with the DP holding on to the rails at the bottom of the camera so that her eye line was accurate and so that we could look each other in the eye still.
that's cool.
I mean, our cameramen are so inventive, and I think the way that the show is shot, they end up having to find ways around things. And we have 3 cameras, so they're always having to find interesting ways around each other. And even in earlier seasons, I remember shooting, I think, a 14 or 15 page scene. We shot it continuously, even though it's broken up in the episode. So it was like a 1-act play of cameramen moving around and us jumping over wires and improvising, and never a dull day at the office.
What was it like for Veep to win Best Comedy Series at the Emmys last year?
Oh, that was so surreal and extraordinary. I mean, I was so happy for everyone. It's a show that I'm wildly proud to be a part of regardless, but to have that kind of acknowledgement and you know what comes with that was really exciting. And for me, I was so happy were acknowledged in that way and that Armando was acknowledged in that way, particularly because, you know, there was a regime change in the last year, and I felt like they really deserved that. And then it was so great to come to Los Angeles and find that, you know, the tone and quality and heart of it was not only maintained, but there were new things that were contributed, and all of our writers now are equally brilliant in different ways, and is such an extraordinary man. Like, I feel very lucky because I've gotten to work with these who are so passionate and irreverent, and to be able to have both of those things while still playing the same character and being a part of the same show is a pretty unusual experience. And so it was a huge relief also after the honor of having one comedy series to feel like all of the things that made it special were out
What's your favorite
in
Veep?
this season.
Yeah. What's your favorite Veep moment of all time?
I only caught the tail end of that question.
What's your favorite Veep moment of all time?
Oh my God. Well, there are a few. I definitely would say that documentary was a highlight for me. And there is a moment in the next episode, in the finale, that I can't say, that's really gratifying. I loved doing the Camp David episodes. Any kind of big group scene is always really fun. But also, the red dress episode was a really great moment because it's arguably the most directly that Catherine ever lashes out or stands up to her mother, other than in the Camp David episode as well. Yeah, but I think like the 21st birthday was great because everyone's involved. I loved this scene this year when Marjorie and I tell Selena that we're in love and we say, wasn't it obvious? I love watching Kevin Dunn and Gary work off of each other. Anything with Tony and Julia, Matt with his gum. I mean, the characters are so specific that of all of these moments, because I feel like part of what I love most is just how distinctive each of the people are and their respective behaviors, you know.
Well, who's your favorite character to play opposite?
Ooh. I think ultimately it would be Selena, probably just because she's the person that Catherine deals most directly with, and because of their respective dynamic, it's always, you know, rich with subtext and rage and all of these things that are kind of unspoken between them. And also, obviously, working off of Julia is just astounding and extraordinary. I'll never forget shooting the Mima episode, and it took us a while. The scene where I come in and say, you know, is Mima better? And she tells me that she's died. It was such a delicate balance to strike, and the take that they ended up using where she's sort of hysterically laughing and you can see that she's not okay was such a chilling thing to witness and watch happen to her. And it was so different from any other take, and I was in complete awe of her in that moment. But, and I'm not just saying this to be diplomatic, literally, I do love doing scenes with everyone. Doing the likability scene with Gary Cole was really fun. Doing scenes with Tony Hale, but it's really hard for me not to laugh because his reactions are just so outrageous.
Mm.
But also doing scenes with Clea Duvall has been great. It's a very different energy, and again, exploring sort of that side of Catherine is always really fun.
Yeah, I remember in the early seasons, I thought the scenes with you and Jonah were so much fun.
Oh yeah, well that's the thing. I think I didn't say that because it's a thread that's sort of been lost a little bit, but or not even lost. It's just that circumstances have changed. But Tim and I were always vying for moments where we could just have Jonah be as pervy to Catherine as possible, because he's the only person that would be disrespectful enough to not be cognizant of Selena's presence. He just is so wildly unaware. But yeah, that was always really fun to play with. I actually, when I was doing ADR for the documentary episode, the lines that I had to record asking Jonah questions, they're like, can you warm that up a bit? I was like, oh, sorry. I think I'm just playing Catherine's general annoyance at his presence and feeling that he's likely to, break and say something inappropriate.
Yeah, we had what was I gonna say, like that first episode, I think it was the first episode you were in where you just cut Jonah down after he's hitting on you, is one of the best moments of that season.
Oh, you know what, that was improvised. The scene naturally had ended, but Armando always had a habit of letting the scene keep going, and that might have even been the first scene that I shot. And he just said, do you know your shirt is see-through, which was not scripted at all. And I don't think I, even realized that was the case. So they kept that moment.
Oh, that was good. Oh, that was great moment. I was just gonna, how are you most like or least like Catherine?
Sorry, can you ask that again?
How are you most and least like Catherine?
Oh, yeah, I think that any comparison between us would be quite, and I think that we're similar in that when Catherine feels strongly about something, she's very direct about it, and I relate to that, although I think the things that we probably feel strongly about and value are quite different. But yeah, I think I very differently. I think I'm definitely more effusive and fast talking and playful, flirtatious. But that was part of what I was attracted to about playing her. And I think particularly because I got to be a part of the incarnation of Catherine and the ways that she changed from the page to when we shot that first episode. I think as an actor, exciting to play someone that isn't you and that has different sets of behavior and sort of different speed at which they function and different ways to relating to other people. That was really important to me. So.
Well, Sarah, thanks so much for talking with us and bearing with technology. And it sort of went okay, didn't it?
It actually did. I'm so relieved. And I apologize. I really have the worst luck with anything technological. And so I have a feeling that it was some sort of weird thing that I brought.
I feel like it was very Veepish.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a pleasure.
No worries. I feel like it was very Veepish, Sarah. Can you hear me, Sarah?
Oh, no. I think you were saying that you think it went okay, but I can't hear you.
I said I think it was very Veepish.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, we planned this. It was supposed to be in the vein and the tone of the show.
Yes, exactly. And all the best, Sarah, for the Emmys and for the next season of the show. And for the final next week.